It has been quite a weekend for airplane fans, especially those of you interested in World War II aviation history. An American military icon has been here in Western New York all week. An original B-17 Bomber, this one owned by the Liberty Foundation out of Oregon. Thrilling fans and veterans alike at the Buffalo Airport. Have you seen it? It's impressive enough on static display on the ground, but when it's in the air, that's something else altogether. Our own Keith Radford was lucky enough to go for a ride.
When it comes to World War II military aircraft, she is the queen of the skies, the B-17 Flying Fortress. This one, built in 1944.
What's it like to fly an airplane that's almost 75 years old?
Well, it's an amazingly honorable experience. It's amazing to get the veterans that we fly. It's a real honor to fly this aircraft.
It's hard to believe that these airplanes are almost 75 years old. They built 13,000 of them for the war effort. Only a dozen still are flying around the world today. These planes flew for the famous 8th Air Force, American crews bombing the Germans in Europe. Crews on these airplanes only had a 20% chance of coming home alive.
Unlike modern-day airplanes that practically fly themselves now, the crews on these big old bombers got a real workout every time they climbed on board.
This airplane is very physical to fly. It takes a lot of muscle to move this bird around.
On this day, on board this historic warbird, 92-year-old World War II veteran Roy Phillips from the town of Royalton. He landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day, and when he looked up in the heat of battle, he says he smiled for a brief moment.
And I've seen thousands of these things go over. Really a sight to see. You could see their contrails in the air, you know.
Along with the strength the pilots needed to fly a B-17, conditions on board were brutal. No pressurization at 20,000 feet over Europe in the dead of winter.
No heat. Windows wide open. You can imagine how cold it was for the pilots and the crew.
They flew with electric suits on that they had to plug in, and then above 10,000 feet had to be on oxygen. So it was a very uncomfortable environment. And the thing about it that is amazing about those guys is that every time they walked out to those airplanes, they had an 80% chance that they weren't coming home. And they still went and did it.
This actual airplane, the Madras Maiden, escaped those bombing runs. Instead, it was used as a test bed for what was at the time new technology.
When this airplane came off the assembly line in October of '44, it went to Wright Field in Dayton, and they developed the Pathfinder radar, which enabled our bombers to actually do their airstrikes in bad weather. If the targets were clobbered, they could use this radar. So it was used to certify and make that Pathfinder radar work, and then it trained crews to use the Pathfinder radar.
The B-17 helped win the war for the Allied forces. 3/4 of a century later, the few examples left serve to remind us all of what it took to save freedom.
Does it seem like a really long time ago when you were 18 and in the war?
No, I remember those guys every day of my life and that I was in the Army with. I remember every day of my life. I think about those guys and what we went through, and you know, they're all gone now, and I guess I got to do something for posterity, so that's why I'm glad you invited me to go on this trip.
How important is it to keep a plane like this in the air?
It's incredibly important for the generations to know the sacrifices that were made to give us our country. We can't let them forget, and this is one way that we remind them.
At the Buffalo Airport, Keith Radford, 7 Eyewitness News.